Hi, welcome to the Indie Wine Podcast. My name is Matt Wood, and this is episode 112. Today we have the recording of a panel on regenerative agriculture from the recent WINeFare festival run by the Vineyard. Since 2018, the Vineyard has been organizing WINeFare. It's tasting with women who make and import natural wine. Before the tasting begins, they have forums on social or environmental issues concerning the wine industry. This year, board member Tiffani Patton of Laughing Gems Wines moderated a panel on regenerative viticulture with Prudy Fox, legendary organic and regenerative viticulturist working mostly in the Santa Cruz Mountains, Jill Mathiasen of Mathiasen Wines, and Matt Walsh of Piscinas Ranch. The discussion took place on May 30th at the Catherine Clark Gallery just before the festival. The Unfiltered Festival is this weekend, July 25th and 26th, and you can still get tickets at donkeyandgoat.com/unfiltered. 2 days of great winemakers pouring their wines, 3 wonderful panels each day, and a chance to catch a few winemakers that you rarely see out in the wild. It'll be a lot of fun. It's also a chance to purchase wines from all these producers. We all know how much shipping is these days, and this is a chance to stock up without paying those extra fees. You can follow the festival at Unfiltered Wine Festival. A reminder that I have a Patreon at patreon.com/IndieWinePodcast. Link is in the show notes also. And if you're enjoying the podcast, any amount to help me keep telling wine stories ad-free is super appreciated. It's all run independently and meant to be available for everyone. Last thing I want to do is putting sort of wall around access to the information. So telling a friend about the podcast, sharing about it on social media, or leaving a review are great quick ways to help out too. Okay, here we go.
Okay, well, I guess we can start now. Good morning. How's everyone doing today? Thanks for joining us for a talk at 10:30ish in the morning. I appreciate it. We all appreciate it. So first, I can just introduce myself. I'm Tiffani. I make wine with Laughing Gems Wine with my business partner and friend Jonathan Yang, and then also I'm a board member of the Vineyard. I joined last fall. And I'm a board member of the Mesa Refuge and Feed Black Futures. I love to volunteer. I love to work for free, I guess. But they're all like the causes that I'm really passionate about. And then on today's panel, we have Matt Walsh from Piscinas Ranch. We have Jill Mathiasen from Mathiasen Wines and Prudy Fox of Fox Viticulture. We're going to be talking about regenerative viticulture today, and really I wanted to get into sort of like the philosophy behind why these folks are practicing the style of viticulture they are practicing. And I kind of came to that because I was rereading Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, who is an indigenous botanist and professor and writer, and she's just brilliant. But one of the things that she said that really spoke to me, which I'm just going to read it now, is... Knowing that you love the earth changes you, activates you to defend and protect and celebrate. But when you feel that the earth loves you in return, that feeling transforms the relationship from a one-way street into a sacred bond. And I just love that idea of like working with the land, working with the earth, and how it's not just like it's not a one-way street, right? It's reciprocal. You get something out of it, you give into it, and you get something back. So that's what we're gonna be talking about. But before we get into that like bond and two-way street, just wanted to hear a little bit about their viticulture practices. There's a lot of different terms and like different methods of practicing viticulture and different and agriculture, like organic, sustainable, regenerative, biodynamic. A lot of those terms, I mean, they all have different meanings, but I feel like oftentimes they're kind of used loosely and thrown around like interchangeably. So I'd like for each of you to sort of share briefly the style of viticulture that you use and what makes it different from others. Prudy, do you want to start?
Sure. Why not? Hello, everyone. So I'm a viticulturist. I'm a consultant. So I work with, well, over the span of my career since 1984, 85, when I was 2, I like to say, but that's not true. Anyway, I've worked, I was a vineyard manager. I've worked with the state as an agricultural biologist for the Ag Commissioner's Office, and then I came back as a private consultant in '98 for my business, Fox Viticulture. So over the course of that time, I probably worked with 300 different clients, mostly in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And so I work with a huge variety of people. Definitely my background when I was in college in the late 70s and early 80s was all about organics and biodynamics. Rudolf Steiner was a big deal. I went to an alternative college, Fairhaven College, after going through Huxley Environmental College. I have a degree in what they call environmental communication, and that's where I took all my chemistry and biology and physiology background classes and applied them into a self-designed major because I'm insane. I don't recommend that to anyone. I mean, I should have just gotten the regular degree, but I had fun doing it, and 300 credits later, that's what I did. But that did allow me to get the state biologist license and that kind of thing. And the point behind all that is I am a scientist at heart, and I really, as an environmentalist, when I was young, I wanted to, Rachel Carlson, I wanted to get out there and make sure that the world was protected. Eagles were dying, waters were polluted. But what I found at the time was the way to apply environmental science that I was learning was to become an environmental inspector, where you look at people's closets and say, oh, you're doing all this wrong. And I like to talk about how to do things right. And that's what I wanted to learn. And so I got into viticulture very early, winemaking with friends in college, and that turned into a job at a winery right out of college. And quickly I realized that I wanted to understand how wine started in the vineyard, which was what everyone said, but nobody really seemed to understand. And I didn't really believe that licking a rock did it. And so I have spent my career trying to understand how flavors develop in wine, and also serendipitously applying environmentally conscious principles to viticulture. So it turns out I get to do environmental stewardship and be a viticulturist at the same time. And so my big goal, working with so many different people in so many different climates, I do have organic vineyards and organic is a legal term, and I think that's really important. And I know Jill will talk about that more. It's a very specifically defined legal term, and it does get thrown around way too loosely. And it's also been abused, unfortunately. I know the people that started organics feel sometimes upset that it's almost limiting, because organics should really be about all the things you can do that are so right, and instead it's kind of focused on what you can't do, and sometimes that could be limiting, and it's super challenging. But everyone who's certified organic is absolutely hats off and deserve to be recognized and not greenwashed, have that taken away because the term is so loosely used. Anyway, getting back to all that, I work across the board, but my main goal with my clients is to get them all off herbicides, because my number one thing is soil biology and really believing in supporting the health and vitality of the earth. I believe all vineyards, when you look at them, you're looking at the top half, but the bottom half is under the part you can't see, but that's 50% of it. And there's a whole life under there. It's a whole civilization. There's political, there's good, there's bad, there's, people you don't like, people you do like, they get along, they don't, fungus, bacteria, the whole everything. And so there's this whole community that we just really know almost nothing about at this point, but we know that it's alive. And when I was in college, they taught soil biology as, here's this inert thing and you put chemicals on it and then things will grow. And you're like, things are kind of growing. Earth likes a blanket is what they say. So the soil's alive, and that's my main thing.
So, Prudy and I are very old friends, and we sort of started in this world together, in this world of agriculture and farming and together. And when we first met, and we had come from fairly different backgrounds, but we were immediately aligned. And I remember you saying it's because we were part of the bubble. Do you remember that? It was like there was this little... Yeah, we were in the USDA lab. We were both living in Santa Cruz and commuted together to Salinas every day. But we were working on cover crops. But one of the things you were talking about is just like philosophically our approach to life, even though we'd come from different parts of the country and really different backgrounds, is that there was just this little bubble kind of going back to the influence of that you mentioned of kind of like the pesticide treadmill that the farmers are on, that, dying of these indicator species that we were all being told we need, were a sign of, bad practices, the circle of poison, where we were, made some of our pesticides illegal, but then we're still exporting them out of the country. So my path after I worked with Prudy was going to work for a nonprofit organization based in Davis called the Community Alliance with Family Farmers. And there I was part of starting these programs. One was called the Lighthouse Farm Network, where we would identify we called them lighthouse farmers. They were farmers who had successfully made the transition from conventional to organic farming, and they would share their information. We would host coffee meetings and field days of how they made that transition successfully. And we'd work with all of the farmers in their community who were interested in making that transition, but they were afraid because there's a lot of risk involved in their mind. It wasn't something they had been taught. And farmers are conservative because if you take a lot of risk, a lot of bad things can happen. So it's makes sense that the farmers are conservative. So having your neighbor, but farmers are always looking over their neighbor's fence to see what they're doing. And so the idea was, we'll open up the window and let you look in, to your neighbors and see what they're doing and how they're doing it. And these farmers really were willing to share all of their experience of how they made that transition. And it starts with the soil, and that's what we taught them. And that's even, in that transition period, to get the soil life back by adding compost and growing cover crops. You jumpstart the microbial activity that Prudy talked about with the compost, and then you have to feed the microbes with cover crops because they depend on carbon as a source of their food. And then the plants are healthier. They're better able to withstand pests and diseases and even extreme climate situations. And so I did that work for nearly 10 years. We sort of also created another program called Biologically Integrated Orchard Systems and Farming Systems, and it was funded by the Environmental Protection Agency, and we kind of expanded that program. And I worked all over the state with farmers, and you were talking about kind of nobody knows where San Benito County is, and that's one of the places that I traveled around to and identified farmers. And I worked in all the rural and agricultural areas in the state of California, and getting part of that was also going beyond just sort of the letter of the law organic farming, but to adopt things like hedgerows, where you can plant things on the edges and borders of your farm to attract beneficial insects and wildlife, putting in barn owl boxes and bird boxes and that sort of thing. So then eventually our trajectory was my husband, Steve, who was also a viticultural consultant. We moved to Napa when he got a job there, and he was working with farmers, very similar path to where Prudy was. And so even though we kind of split out a little bit for a few years, and then we came back together based on Steve's work. And then Steve connected with Prudy. He was like, I went to this conference and Prudy was there. We hadn't seen her since our wedding, and our kids were little, so we were busy. And then we eventually were able to start making our own wine and get our own property and implement a lot of the things that we had been trying to get other farmers to implement ourselves. And that really became an opportunity to become one of those lighthouse farmers, or one of those demonstration farms where we could really show that it's possible to farm this way successfully and not just successfully producing a crop, but being financially successful. I mean, there's no way you're going to be sustainable in your farming practices if you can't make it financially, and that's kind of where we've gotten to today. So it's nice to be here to be able to talk about it with you all. And I was the one, by the way, who wanted to have this a circle because I know, and Prudy wasn't so happy about it. But I feel like I want to have more of a conversation, because even though we have experience, so do you all from your perspective. And I really want to hear also like what your perspective is and how you've experienced the same phenomenon that we is, and how you implement that in your life, and how you who aren't actually in the farming could try to spread this idea and the word. We're a bit of evangelists here, I feel like, and part of our goal is to turn you all into evangelists as well. And that's actually my goal for being here today. So.
All right. I'm Matt Walsh, and I am at Piscines Ranch, and I've got a lot less backstory. As I was much later to the wine world, I spent most of my adult life as a middle school teacher, and after COVID, or during COVID, feeling a little burnt out and wanting something different, started to think about this. It was actually at a wine fair, a virtual wine fair, where I first kind of got the courage or the idea and reached out to Megan Bell, who I got to go help in the Santa Cruz Mountains and then work in the cellar. And she was an amazing mentor, and answering all my questions and trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And while helping her out, I heard she was going to be getting the first fruit from Piscines Ranch, which I had heard about because I love to learn and was reading. I come from more of a humanities background, and environment, nature, conservation has always been something that's important to me, but I always saw this wall between farming and the wild, the nature. And through this process, kind of like that wall started to break down, or the need to break down that wall. Farming needs to be part of that equation. So I now am at Piscines Ranch, where we are in San Benito County. If you don't know where that is, just south of Santa Clara County. It is a beautiful place. Piscines Ranch is a woman-owned ranch. Sally Calhoun is the owner. She bought it 25 years ago and converted first the livestock program to using holistic management. And then about 12 years ago, she brought in Kelly Mulville, the vineyard director, to plant a vineyard that was designed from the ground up to be farmed regeneratively using holistic management practices. And it's been a really amazing place to really jump into this. The work that we're doing there. Just briefly, we have a trellis system that is pretty unique. It is the vines are trained tall, which allows us to graze sheep in the vineyard, both during the dormant season, but also during the grape growing season. And we are trying to use as little inputs. Really restoring the ecosystem is there, but as Jill said, part of this, we want to be this demonstration, but we need to show that this can be economically viable, because if it is not, it's wonderful if, you can have this 25 acres that is great, but really the goal is to spread this. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Actually, could someone get wine glasses for everyone? Is there? Thank you. We're going to try some wine too. And then, sorry, Pretty, did you want
Enhance the conversation.
Yeah. And Pretty, did you want water? Okay, when they bring up the glass, because there's water right here. Okay, so from what I understand about Piscines, the sort of framework, the philosophy is to enable, support nature to flourish. So how does one hold that philosophy while also being accountable to yields?
So I'll briefly talk about holistic management. It's probably a term that's new to many, but holistic management originated in rangeland management. But really what it is a decision-making framework. So if you are managing holistically, you start with a holistic context that is sort of your North Star, what you want the future to look like at the vineyard or the ranch that you are managing, but really it could be anything. So our holistic context has both restoring the ecosystem, but also has profitability and being a place where we can demonstrate what is possible. So the way that this decision-making framework works is when you are making a decision in the vineyard, anything, you are weighing. There's a series of tests that you can run through any decision you're making, and we are weighing both the ecosystem health as well as the viability of the crop that we are trying to produce, which really we have two, both the livestock, the lamb, as well as the grapes. So we can and do make decisions that are not in the best interest of the ecosystem. So, for example, a couple years ago, we had a explosion of voles. I joke that you could walk across the vineyard on the backs of voles, and we were asking everyone, trying to figure out how do we do this, because we were losing basically the entire vineyard. The voles girdle the vines, and we like our ground cover. We let it grow, and voles like to eat under cover. So we were making decisions that aren't in the best interest of the ecosystem, where one of the things we considered is, do we till? If you look on the website, it says that the vineyard is never going to be tilled, but we seriously considered it. We ultimately did not, but we were constantly running these tests. What do we do? And we are still at that point, as we're just finishing replanting the many vines that we did do. Another example where we did, lean to the side of where we do lean to the side of the ecosystem is we do not spray any of the three most popular sprays for powdery mildew. We don't use sulfur, copper, or stylet oil. And why that decision is made is those can have an impact on the insect population. Now, I will say it's important. Everything, what I've learned most is farming is context. What works at our place is not going to be the answer to what works in the Santa Cruz Mountains or Napa or even across the street at a vineyard, because your context is your environment, but it's also the more social elements, the economics, where that is, and San Benito County, our mildew pressure is not going to be as high. So we are able to, by doing canopy management, in most years, prevent losing very much to mildew. We also do spray a lupin-based product occasionally, but I think in the few years that I've been there, we've only had to spray that a couple times. But down the road, if we had a really high mildew pressure year, that would be something that we would continue to be analyzing, running through these tests to make that decision. So it's this balance between what is best to allow that ecosystem to flourish and allowing the business to thrive, so that we can continue to hopefully educate people and show what is possible.
Really quick, can you tell us about the wine?
Yes. So this is a special wine to me. So I mentioned I got to go with Megan Bell to harvest in 2021 the first Grenache. This is that came from the ranch, and I got to see that wine all the way through the process. Kind of my first foray into winemaking, and got to be there. First time I got to visit Paisanes Ranch, and this is the 2024. So this is Megan's last vintage with margins using our fruit, and the first vintage that I got to be a part of the farming side. So this is very special wine to me.
And then Prudy and Jill, if y'all could answer that question too, about how do you balance sort of the philosophy behind your farming practices with just being accountable to like yields and contracts, and yeah, especially you, Pretty, because you have the vineyard management and consulting business.
Right. The very first thing that comes to mind is viticulture and capitalism are at great odds with one another.
100%, yeah.
And I think that's something, having that attitude of going in and I'm gonna get a, the joke, of course, to make $1 million with a vineyard, you start with 5, go down from there, that kind of thing. It doesn't have to be that way, but I do think that, and this kind of transitions into another thought just about the whole wine industry, and I'm sure Jill could relate to this, of how so many of our wineries have become disconnected from the people that are actually doing the work and making the wine happen. And many of my clients over the 40 years I've been doing this, I've lost many clients because they've simply aged out or passed away, and their heirs or whatever, they've sold. A lot of LLCs have emerged, a lot of corporations. And so you end up having owners who are very passionate about their product, but really aren't that connected to it. And you can't really run a vineyard by a ledger alone. It's not that it's not important, but it is. You do have to seek a balance with that. So that was coming into mind. But I do believe that there is intention, and I do believe getting off the pesticide wheel is extremely possible. I have a client who's actually spraying in the coastal side on Chardonnay in California with fresh cow's milk. And he does it weekly, and it takes real commitment because you want to do something like that in a very high pressure mildew area with a varietal that is very susceptible. Those are all other factors I was thinking about when you mentioned Piscinus, and not having the environmental pressure, and also not choosing varietals that are necessarily as susceptible to mildew, because it can really vary. I grow a lot of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, and those are prime Pinot Noir, fall prey to. Does everyone know what powdery mildew is? Are people familiar? It's a fungal organism, and so it has these little hyphae that plant into the leaves and grapes and can really ruin the quality. And traditionally, of course, the pesticide companies, it is an insidious little situation where they sell you products in order to kill the disease, but often that creates other problems. So it really keeps you on their ledger. And so I have certainly been able to be successful at having vineyards that do at least break even or make enough money. Certainly there's vertical integration. The vineyards that have been successfully able to also vertically integrate into wine production, that's usually where it gets more realistic to actually make some money in California and make a living. But I think that direct line, I've always disliked this idea that we only count the success of the vineyard by the tonnage. I think it's just a marker that needs to be changed. And I understand why that's really difficult to do, because it's so obvious that that's such a obvious way to count whether the vineyard worked or not. But if you spend the whole year working with canopy management, working with soils, working with all these quality parameters, and then at the end of the day, all you're looking at is how many tons, or in the case of in Europe, which I actually like better, hectoliters per hectare, at least it's how much juice. So that has to do with how hard you squeeze the grapes, and starts to talk more about that wine journey. But it is very possible to be successful with a vineyard, but I think having an integrated approach and an understanding of your environment and an understanding of what's going to do well and wants to live where you live. So in other words, I have clients who are like, well, I love Cabernet Sauvignon, but I want to live on this foggy coastline. Well, it's probably going to be an uphill battle the whole time. Whereas if you're more willing to grow varietals that thrive in that area, that's part of the process.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, just how do you hold your philosophy when there's also the pressure to have certain yields or fulfill contracts?
I guess, to start with, kind of going back to the Piscinus model, farming is by definition not nature. We've taken whatever was growing naturally in that field out, and we planted something that's usually not native to that place to grow. So we're starting at a point of altering significantly that ecosystem. And the question is, how do we minimize the impact of that alteration that we've already given, like from day one that we're starting? How do we keep the balance of all of the insects and wildlife and soil life as much as possible? But there's compromises. And so it's all about compromises. I think that's what you were referring to in treating the voles. I think that's what you were referring to. Farming is about compromises. And you just need to figure out what your philosophy is, really starting with the philosophy of, and what's your goal, and how do you get there with making the fewest compromises that you have to. But then there's always going to be something that you're going to be faced with, that you're going to have to make that decision. If you have a guiding philosophy, it's going to be easier to know what direction, but sometimes you're going to have to veer from that. And I think, financial decisions are part of that, the whole picture. But there's also being vertically integrated like we are, where we have a crop that we turn into value added, and value added is age old for farmers to make money, because you're making something that we're growing something that is not shelf stable. It's going to actually degrade quickly after you harvest it. So being able to process it, to preserve it, is age old, and that's a model that's helped farmers for a long time. But then there's what's the quality of the grapes and the quality of the wine. We make wine, for example, that is our Chardonnay from our Linda Vista vineyard. Purdy said Chardonnay is really highly susceptible to mildew. We get a lot of mildew in our Chardonnay, but what's the acceptable level? This is something we talk about in pest management. What's the acceptable level of mildew in the crop when you harvest it? And the dogma is a very low, let's say 1 or 2% level of mildew is acceptable in your grapes when you harvest them. If you're growing grapes to sell to other people, they will reject the grapes if the mildew percentage of the crop is too high. We don't have those restrictions in our own growing of the grapes and using them ourselves, and we can have up to 15% mildew in our crop and still make top quality wines. Our Chardonnay has been served in the top restaurants in the world, and they have 15% mildew. So the acceptable level is much higher than what the farming, like the winemaking community is willing to accept. So that's just like one little micro sort of way that we can make that alteration in what we do, and then talk about it publicly and get the wine buyers to understand, yes, you can have these. There are, what you've been told isn't always true. High mildew isn't always so bad for wine quality. And but there is this lack of connection between growing the grapes. We grow the grapes, we make the wine, so we can make those decisions. But if you're just making wine and buying grapes, or you're paying someone else to grow the grapes, and you're looking at other indications for success in that vineyard, then you're really separated from those little fine points of making it, not having to have to spray as much. And there was
I think that's huge. If I could, just while you're thinking of that, I think what Jill's saying there is absolutely huge. And that's where I was talking about following the wine, and getting back to that original idea of wine comes from the vineyard. And when I was lucky enough to do courses in Europe, in Bordeaux and in Burgundy, and what they teach there, the way they teach about viticulture and enology, they aren't separate courses the way they are here at Davis in the schools. They talk about acids and tannins and phenolics and anthocyanins, and they talk about these different components of wine, and this is how they start in the vineyard and how they develop in the grape, and going all the way through to the wine production process and this aging of the wine. And what Jill's referring to is the fact that they can have this tolerance of mildew because of the way they handle the grapes when you bring them in. And so it's not like their wine has mildew. Of course, it doesn't. And it tastes wonderful. So but you must have that connection, and that has been lost in production agriculture.
Oh, but I was going to say another point, and then I'll stop. But about growing the appropriate grapes back to in the appropriate region, and the fact that we had a vineyard that we started farming a few years ago. It was in Carneros, southern part of Napa, way more susceptible to mildew and also to other diseases that we have down there in that particular region. And everybody in the Carneros grows Pinot and Chardonnay. And we have decided they were badly diseased. It wasn't just mildew, but we've decided to replant with varieties that aren't susceptible to those diseases. And we're planting Sauvignon Blanc, and it's just a whole different. So that's a really important thing. But then there's another opportunity, I think, down in the future that I think is even more exciting, which is looking at, and people talk about hybrids, native California grapes, where you and sort of thinking about creating a market for just red varieties of grapes that don't have a variety like a varietal pedigree, and you just make a mixed blend of these grapes, and they're easy everyday drinking wines. They're not world-class wines. You're not going to win awards over them, but they're very good, reasonable everyday drinking wines. And for the bulk of what people drink for wine, they would be perfectly satisfactory and even delicious, and without having to irrigate in many cases, without having to spray anything in many cases. So there's a lot of opportunity, I think, for evolving our industry to being more sustainable. And we're always pushing more ideas. I mean, we have never felt like we're at a finish line for sustainability. We're always like, what can we do? What more can we do? Where can we go from here?
Okay, so less about control and extraction and more just how do we work with and allow things to flourish. Prudy, something that you said in our conversation a few weeks ago stood out to me, and you were talking about how you think the conversation around wine needs to shift into something like talking about why and how wine is soulful. Can you explain that a little bit, and also share does regenerative viticulture have to do anything about that? Does the soul start in the soil? Yeah.
Okay, that's big time. I do get philosophical. there is a theme here. That goes back to kind of the story and wanting people to be involved with their wine. With my clients, for example, I've really gone out of my way even with clients who are top CEOs and business people. I really try to get them involved with their wine. At least try to get them to meet with the winemakers. If they're not involved themselves, I try to get them to come out in the vineyard. I really try to get them engaged behind the wine so that they start to love it, because I think wine can be a conversation starter. We know that. And I've certainly seen wine of a higher quality with a greater story, and that story coming from people who are involved with growing the wine. And generally, when people are really directly involved with growing their own wine, usually that wine is much better handled from the ground up. And think about whenever you are enjoying a glass of wine, just as we were enjoying that Grenache, that stimulates your memories and your history and your beginnings of wine. And so it's almost like when you have a vintage, a 21, it might take you back to where were you in 21. And I think that's the part. A friend of mine who's starting a Substack is actually talking about the love of wine. If we've kind of forgotten, we've gotten so caught up in memorizing the 52 Bordeaux or the Chablis or some special wine that people go on and on about. And those are all, it's not that that's not important, and it is fun to know that, but honestly, if you really want to start to feel wine, it has much more to do with what you're experiencing as you're enjoying it, how it changes in the glass. A really high quality wine, a wine that comes from living soil, that has a lot of different processes. It's a chemical process that's still going on. You have all these phenolic chains that are chains of molecules that are basically different flavor components and acids and tannins that are all working together. And they're changing even in your glass as you're sitting there. That's why when you swirl it, when you let the oxygen in, it's changing as it goes. And that in itself can stimulate ideas and conversation. And it's not something you can get from a screen, and you can't read it on TikTok. I mean, you can read it, but it won't be the same as sharing sharing that with somebody in real life, or even, I mean, I've done tastings over the internet. Even that can be fun because you're both drinking the same thing or something similar. It can stimulate conversation and new ideas, and there is no AI that can ever take that away from us. And so that's the more consciously that product is grown, that will feed into those ideas. I don't want to get too. I try to be really careful to not get too out there with this conversation, but production agriculture can be brutal. Mechanical harvesting, when you buy a $10 or $12 bottle of wine off the shelf, you usually, and it just says California on it or something like that, well, there's probably a good chance it was machine harvested, which means that all the birds and squirrels and rats that live in the canopies are in your wine too. I hate to tell you this, but it's true. And that's part of the reason they put so many chemicals in it, to kill all that so it won't make you sick. And so, and those stories are going to go into that wine too. So, I mean, sometimes I think that some friends of mine, children got married and they had this really cheap wine, and I felt so bad for them because I felt like I actually thought it didn't lift up the experience the way it could the way it could.
Yeah, Jill, actually, could you tell us a little bit about this Cab Franc?
Oh, yeah, sure. This is an example. This is Cabernet Franc that is from a vineyard where our winery is. Some of you have been there, and where our house is. And these are two vineyards that we converted to regenerative organic farming. At our house, we started farming in 2007, and at the winery in 2017. And it's just been really rewarding to watch that transformation of a vineyard when it's been farmed conventionally for so long, and then you start seeing the soil life coming back, and then you start seeing the vines respond to the healthy soil. The roots in the vines can reach into more nooks and crannies. There's more fungal growth on the roots. Then the vines are healthier. The color of the leaves are darker. They hold on to the leaves longer into the season, like after the vines begin to sort of die off after harvest, and the shoots are longer. I mean, you can just, back to the soul of the vineyard, you can feel like the energy coming out of a healthy, well cared for, loved vineyard. And we live in the middle of that, one of those vineyards, and so I feel it every day. And it's, really, you can I think taste it in the wine as well. And a funny thing is that the top echelon wineries in the Napa Valley, like the cult wines that you think of are the most expensive wines, they're all farmed organically. And there's one reason: because of the wine quality. That's why they do it. And so it's not just like a crazy idea that we had, it's actually proven to be better quality wine. And I think it's, something that we can everybody could be doing. And the wines, it's the polar opposite of what Prudy was talking about with the wines that, are just bulk harvested and mechanically harvested. There was something else I was going to say along those lines, but it'll come to me.
Randall Graham at Bonnie Doon actually had a wonderful presentation many years ago where he managed to make some slides, put his wine on slides under a microscope and show that. And it showed incredible complexity compared to just a really standard farmed Monterey vineyard where it's just what we call go and blow. The tractor goes through, it tills up the soil, it sprays, it does all those things. Grapes go into a truck. And so comparing those wines with the wines that he was doing organically, and the level of cellular complexity that he was able to show microscopically was really fascinating.
And I do one other kind of point in this whole kind of discussion of how it happens is, like, Prudy's out in the vineyard all the time looking, and one of our And so are we every day. And one of the kind of adages of farming is the best fertilizer is a farmer's footsteps. And if you're, but a lot of agriculture is like pickup truck. Like you just drive by and you see stuff and you're like, that block needs fertilizer, that net block, needs to be sprayed with, And so, but you have to walk the vine, you have to walk the rows to really know what's going on in your vineyard. And that's, where, again, the kind of large bulk of wine is made is in that opposite of what we're trying to do here. But there's a cost to what we're trying to do. I mean, the human labor, there's a cost. So that's why wine is expensive, and that's why our wine is expensive.
Yeah, I'll just, to me, what Jill was saying, this, being present in the vineyard, walking that, our vineyard, you look across the street and you see some, corporate owned conglomerate vineyards. Our vineyard is 25 acres and we do everything in-house, a team of 4 of us. And you look at those and you're like, how can anyone ever touch those vines? I think of the number of times that each of the vines is being touched, with intentionality and being there and noticing the things and that connection. And to, where the question started with, this soulful wine, I was lucky to get involved in wine among winemakers who had this connection to the vineyards. California, it's incredibly hard to be, have this vineyard dream of farming and making wine from your own fruit. But so lucky to see these people where they are connected to the farmers, to the people who are who are in the vineyard doing the work. I think of some of our winemakers, Camines to Dreams, Tara and Maria. They make their wine in Santa Barbara County. They came up to get fruit from us, but they are there multiple times during the year, walking, having potlucks with us at the bunkhouse, building this community. And I think that it has an impact on that wine. I know for me, wine, I grew up in the Bay Area, and the first time I went to Napa, I was like 24 because we had a friend from Italy visiting, and it was boring to me. And, I asked questions and I'm trying to get the story, but I didn't know where we were going. I wasn't going to the right places. And it wasn't until later in life when I started actually in Europe and seeing people who are connected to these wines and, hearing the story, that's when wine first spoke to me. And I think the best winemakers are going to have that connection to the farming one way or another.
So y'all have talked about, like the sort of environmental or ecological aspect of it, and obviously the financial aspect of viticulture, of farming, of making wine. And then there's also this social aspect. And when people talk about sustainability, I went to school for sustainable management, and so they're always saying people, planet, profit. Like those are the 3 things that we should be like caring about. And it often feels like the people side or the social side of it is not as deliberate or as intentional as the other sides of it, or the social aspect of it is a byproduct or a positive externality of doing something different. But Jill, I feel like at Matthias and y'all are like super, super deliberate and intentional about it with your labor practices and how you treat your team with like full-time year-round employment, like health insurance, and also all of the other work that y'all do with supporting 280 Project. And yeah, so I would love to hear, were there any like challenges or surprises for you when doing business that way, and what sort of allows y'all to do it that makes it, and I guess what allows you to do it, and why is it harder for some other businesses, people to do the same?
I mean, mentorship, apprenticeship and mentorship has been ancient, way of learning things. And it's like really, especially crafts and trades. You learn those through other people who have experience doing those things. And that's as long as humans have been around. You learn from other people. And in our world, we're first generation in the vineyard and first generation in the winery. We've had the great good fortune of having mentors showing us and helping us along the way. And it just was natural for us to want to, give that forward and mentor other people like we had the opportunity to be mentored. And it's really that simple. I mean, you have to obviously treat the people that work for you well, but, you want to help them improve. And we've had so many, even just employees who've gone on to start their own wine brands, who've gone on to do, other really exciting things. And we are still good friends with them. We still support them. We still, we want to see them succeed. And they started with us. And it's just, I don't know, it's what you do. It's what we do. That's no other way to say it.
I get excited hearing you talk about it because I know what incredible stewards you are of your people as well. And for what we do is I work with a labor contractor, so I don't have any direct employees, but a lot of people think a contractor is a dirty word, but it's actually been a 25-year relationship. And what they have, even though they're a really large contractor that works with people all over the flower industry, vegetables, all kinds of stuff. What they've given me is the ability to work with about 20 people, the same people who at this point, I'm on their third generation. And in some cases. And so these are people that I know them, I know their families, I know their kids, I know their parents. I've had them stay with me sometimes if they're coming through. I've helped bail them out of jail if they give ICE fines them, although they usually have some kind of paperwork, although sometimes the picture's not quite the same size that it should be. But just various things that go on, it's pretty shocking what's happening there in the world. But at the same time, what I've seen is that as minimum wage goes up, and this company, they do keep the paperwork, they do pay workman's comp, they do pay medical insurance, they do take care of their people. If somebody gets hurt, they totally take care of them. And what I've seen come from that is people have gone from driving dirty old disgusting cars that barely run and drinking beer while you're not looking to people that are really excited about coming to work. They're driving decent cars together. That sometimes they carpool, a lot of times they carpool, but the cars have really gone up in the way they look and the way they operate, the way people feel about themselves, the way they dress, the way they show up to work. I don't have any alcohol problems anymore in the field. I don't have those kind of people showing up to want to work because they know that if they're working with me, I'm going to teach them about what they're doing. I'm not just going to say, do this and walk away. I'm going to tell them why we're doing it. I'm going to show them refractometers. They love using the little instruments that we use. It's especially the younger ones. It's such an empowering thing. And I almost get teary about it because the younger ones, they're so smart and they want to learn so much, and it's just been kept from them and assumed. And farm worker has such a lowly status, people's impression, and yet these people have such great intelligence and such great observation, and they're my eyes and ears in the vineyard more than anyone. And they come to me and they call me and they say, hey, we think you shouldn't do it this way, you should do it that way. And 90% of the time I will agree with them and let them do it, say you're right. And so that's such a big part of it. It's a team spirit. It's respect.
Really quick, before Matt answers the question, Prudy, can you tell us about the wine that we're drinking?
Sorry. Get all teary up with them.
Thank you.
You get way too involved with everyone. The wine we're drinking, right, the third round here is the Syrah from the Green Earth Zyanti Vineyards, and this is probably my very favorite vineyard in the Santa Cruz Mountains. Was planted by Greg Knowlton and his wife Kathleen Starkey. It is own-rooted, old vine, dry farmed, organic. I just don't think you get another vineyard that has all of those things happening. That's also started in the 80s. And I know there's a few, but it's about a 16-acre vineyard. And unfortunately, Greg passed away and the vineyard was sold, but the people that took over the Green Earth Liangs, they are a corporation, but their whole goal was to continue Greg's vision of they're all about sustainability, and they moved forward. They won't let me change a thing. They totally support the organic practices. We really get to do a lot of canopy work, which in my opinion is one of the strongest ways to disease resistance and success with minimizing inputs is taking care of your canopy and letting the grapes grow to a certain level. And light, Galileo said wine is sunlight in a glass, and that's huge in canopy management. So anyways, Zayani's just an incredible place. It's 1,400 feet. It's southwest facing, southeast facing, both. It's on this little knoll, and you can't really see the Pacific Ocean, but it is there in the distance. The fog comes up but doesn't stay there. Just a great kind of a Grand Cru where you get great drainage, but still soil water holding capacity, and that's why it can be dry farmed. And it's just a fabulous place. So this is the Syrah. It's made by a young man named Tyler Wister, who started with me about 10 years ago and has got his own label now called Full Circle.
Thank you. And then
We've been able to make wine from this vineyard, and it's one of our very favorites. Yeah.
how does Piscinas work in the social aspect, caring for the people who work there and for people at large?
So I feel very lucky to have landed at a spot that this is part of the mission, both, in treating the employees fairly, healthcare, year-round employment, but also Sally Calhoun, the owner of the ranch, started the No Regrets Initiative, where she is both doing philanthropic as well as impact investment in the regenerative agriculture space, definitely not limited to viticulture, all across the country. And we have event spaces, and many of the workshops that are there are targeted at women, at traditionally disenfranchised groups. So it's really cooked into the ethos of the ranch. And to why it doesn't happen more, I think Prudy nailed it earlier when she said capitalism. These are problems that are bigger than the wine industry, and I think it's important that as consumers, you're looking for those people who are trying to do things the right way. But it's, hard to have sort of a purity test because it is incredibly hard to be profitable but we got to be moving in the right direction. Because I know when I was looking at, do I want to start my own wine brand? And you look at, can you pay someone something that you would find reasonable? And that's not something a sacrifice that I'm not willing to make. It's hard.
And I have just one more thing. I know I really want to keep this positive, but we are in a moment in the wine industry that some of you or most of you may be aware of, that there's for various reasons, a very large reduction in wine consumption right now. And at the same time as selling wine is much harder, our costs are just going through the roof, like our workers' comp insurance and our health insurance that we're, very prioritizing, still paying. We pay health insurance 100% for all of our employees, plus 50% for all of their dependents. And then as they age, which they're all getting older, we're all getting older, the health insurance just keeps going up. And so we're in a tricky time right now. And our costs of everything are going up. Our supplies, tariffs, all the things you hear about. It's real, and it's impacting us. There's people who aren't going to make it through. There are people who haven't been able to make it through this tough time. So it is important to support the people who are doing the right thing more than ever right now.
Thank you. So I have 15 more questions I want to ask you all, but we don't have the time for that. So I'm just going to ask one more and then open it up to questions from y'all. So in the beginning, I read that Robin Wall Kimmerer quote and about that sacred bond and that two-way street. And I'm just wondering, I guess basically, what has been the impact of working with the land on you? What has the land asked of you?
Throws me. That's right. Okay. Alexander Humboldt, my absolute hero. I don't know how many of you, The Invention of Nature, it's a wonderful book published in 2015. And Alexander Humboldt was an amazing individual who lived in the late 1700s. I can't remember, 1800s. No, it was the 1800s. And anyway, one of those, I do get it a little confused. But the point is, he is the guy who really looked at systems. And as much as he loves the idea that we've broken everything down to kingdom, species, varietals, all these little subcategories that help us identify things, he was more about how things work together. And that for me is just a complete mantra of going forward. And I think we will all benefit in our lives. And I actually have the good fortune to live in a 100% solar home, and I have since '94, and just because I live in a sunny spot. And all these things are possible. That's the whole point. Just like you see all the electric cars right now. Yeah, the weak link is the batteries. We've got to figure that out. But there's so much we can do by just observing nature. And that's what it's done for me, is just observing nature and how nature works together. And nature really does take care of itself. And the earth actually takes care of itself, and it tolerates us. And is actually incredibly generous at putting up with the things we do. That being said, there are great lessons if we just watch the natural systems and how they work around us. So as it's very true, I thought it was a great point Jill had about how agriculture is not a natural thing. We are introducing something new to the soil, yet the earth is so generous it allows for it if we just start to understand how it can incorporate the plants that we put in there, and we'll take them in and grow them as long as we're being conscious of how those systems work and what fits in that area and being respectful.
I don't know how I can top that. Yeah, I just think, I feel like it's, the energy that I get, we live in the middle of our vineyard, the energy I get every day from, the plants growing around me. I love being in a city, but, I've gotten to the point where now after a few days, it's like I need the, refueling of that energy that it gives me on a daily basis.
Yeah, I grew up in the suburbs and city, and moving to the country from a family that is not in agriculture. Everyone's like, how are you going to do that? But I spent most of my life trying to escape weekends, waiting for the weekends, get into the Sierras, get into the Santa Cruz Mountains, go to the beach. For that, it gave me this energy. So it's been incredibly healing to me to spend most of my time. I live on the ranch. I get to eat. All my proteins are coming from my backyard, drinking wines, over in community with the other people on the ranch there. And it's and the other big thing is I have 3 kids, and watching them build at a young age this relationship with land. That I did not have the experience. I had places that were important, got to visit, but to see the seasons change, to be there, to notice things has been amazing. And I think for what is the land asking of me, Robin Wall Kimmerer is one of the big, that was kind of a impetus for starting to think about how do I change my life, reading that book. But I think it's still unfolding. But coming from a background in teaching and now getting to when people come to the ranch and want to see the vineyard, I get to lead the tours. I think part of it, what the land is asking of me, is this, is this advocacy, is this sharing this message of how important this is, how we need to be thinking of this, supporting wineries that care about these things, about regenerative farming. So, but like I said, I think it's still unfolding, and we'll see what that land asks of me as I continue.
Thank you so much. Does anyone have questions for Prudy, Jill, Matt?
Yeah. So you were talking about traveling and seeing some practices in other areas. this is a new topic for me. I'm just learning it. I would love to know your guys' insight on how does California not necessarily prepare, but look into that whole conversation on these topics, and what do you maybe see are some opportunities for us that happen elsewhere?
Sorry, I'm a blabbermouth, you know. What I've seen just front and center is the difference in traveling, for example, in Burgundy, especially in Burgundy, where you can still get out in the villages and you can still walk by a very unassuming, funky house that will have a wine barrel and a bottle of wine sitting on it out in front, and that means it's a tasting room, and you can go in and try some wine. And you're often, if you're in that situation, you still have the opportunity, and in Italy this is true, you still have that opportunity to talk with people that are directly tied to the production. And what my experience, and Jill could really speak to this being up in Napa, but even in the Santa Cruz Mountains, it's starting to go that way, where more often than not, you're with people that are passionate in the tasting room and love presenting the wine to you, but they really have no connection to the wine. And that's something I've been really working with the different owners I work with, of saying, let's at least just get together. The tasting room people want to know more. They really do. But one harvest in New Zealand, which you can do, I mean, you get an internship and they'll work you. And that's okay, because you get that experience, and that'll open your eyes to it. But the really being a part of it can make such a difference. So maybe, I'm not sure if your question is more about how could, if you want to just have a more interesting experience traveling, maybe get more involved. There is agrotourism, and there are people who are putting out incredible food and agricultural tours that allow you to kind of meet those people. But you do want to meet the people that really are involved, and it's not that I love the tasting room people, but they aren't always necessarily. Sometimes they're just kind of spouting the story. I mean, I was teasing one of the guys where I said, you know, it's great that you dated Cher and you played baseball, but really, can we get back to the wine? You know, it just, and that's, I mean, and it's entertaining. I mean, wine is fun, and we want to remember it's fun. And I get too serious on the science side, but even the science can be fun if it's presented in a way. And I think most people have received enough education and have the intellect that I believe you all are craving more information about how does this really work. I don't think I'm the only one who wants to know why wine starts in the vineyard. And so I would look toward any opportunity, if you find people or places that are willing to talk about that and not about the 50 Bordeaux 1952 Cheval or whatever, you know, just not that that's unimportant, but I think if you're craving that, you want to hit that, look for people who want to talk about what's really going on out there.
Does anyone have other questions? Yeah.
I live in a high pressure area.
Say it again. Sorry.
Briefly, I live in a high pressure powdery mildew area, and we use cinerate instead of sulfur. But I'm curious about milk and whatever the lupine product is. Where could I learn more about that?
The lupine product it's actually ProBlade. Is the commercial version. It's called ProBlade, PROBLAD, and it's a lupin protein. And the milk is a brand new thing to me, but it goes way back to Amigo Bob. Whey. It's lactobacillus. It's the bacillus, and there's many biologicals that are out there now. Double nickel, for example, triathlon, that are based on those bacillus products, and also trichodermas that are out there. So there's many alternatives but that's what and cinerate is just now. You were using a little crop oils, weren't you, or thyme or something?
But yeah, we've mostly low pressure areas. We're in low pressure areas mostly. So yeah.
And then you had a question?
Yeah, with reading that regenerative culture, the soil will be reacting better to climate change. And I was interested in if there are some specifics about that. How does it work? Or is it just a general statement because the soil is healthier and reacting better?
The organic soil, you mean?
Yeah, exactly.
I'll just jump in that just quickly because I want him to say it, but that earth loves a blanket and feeding, and Matt's really going to be able to speak to this, of doing that regenerative, feeding the soil, having crops, that not taking them away, not relying on chemicals. Chemical fertilizers are filled with salts because that's what makes them soluble, but it's the salts that kill the biology of the soil. And so getting back to natural inputs and inputs that grow and die on the same place contribute to that integrity.
Yeah, and I'd say there's so much there that you could go into. If you're building your soil health, your microbiology is good. You're increasing your water holding capacity. Like if you look up how much raising your carbon 1%, how much your water holding capacity is. And then, I think the big one is, our vineyard went from the original site that when it was selected had 7 species that were growing there. We are now over 100 species there. We don't plant a cover crop. We did for a few years, but often in San Benito County, it gets too dry and then it dies out. But we still see many of those species. We've had natives come in. Some of those we brought in ourselves. But diversity builds resilience. And I think what's already been talked about before is also finding those varieties. So Piscines, we're trying to figure out. We don't know what's going to do best there. We have 25 acres and we have 17 varieties planted, which is kind of crazy. And likely eventually we'll find some of those do not do well. But the idea, you look globally, there's over 2,000 varieties of vinifera, and every region in Europe had their local one that, co-evolved with these people. They selected the best ones. So I think it's a process, but I think it is a piece of the puzzle. It is going to build that resilience if you're using these regenerative practices.
The way cover crops work, if you ever see a cross section of it, and it's really interesting, and this goes for the no-till thing, where if you watch those little rootlets that go down into the soil, they actually bring the raindrops down and take them into the soil. Where if you have a soil that you're constantly tilling, and this was huge in the grazing world, that's where they really got started with this, is they found all these people who were raising cattle and whatnot. Their land was being destroyed, turned into parking lots because the cattle were tramping it, and there was no regeneration. But once they learned how to have the grasses grow themselves, like what Matt's talking about, and the rain, it's so interesting to watch how it brings the rain down into the deeper soil profile. So I think that's what you're referring to when you say the soils are more resilient when they're managed this way. That's part of the reason.
I do.
Yeah, I just heard something the other day that I wanted to share. Somebody said that it was a grape grower, and he said, "I'm not farming grapes, I'm farming microbes."
All right. Well, we do have to end the panel and the discussion since WINeFare is starting. But thank you again, Prudy, Jill, and Matt. And they'll be around today if you want to ask them questions. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks for listening today. WINeFare is a great woman-focused tasting every year. You can find out more about it or become a member of the Vineyard at www.thevineyard.com. Everyone on the panel is doing great work with farming and wine production also. You should check out all their wines. Please follow the podcast on wherever you're listening and the Instagram at IndieWinePodcast. You can email indiewinepodcast@gmail.com or Instagram with comments, questions, or feedback. If you're enjoying the podcast, I'd love if you told a friend or wine lover about it and help spread the word. Rating, reviewing, or donating at patreon.com/IndieWinePodcast helps a lot too. It all goes to offsetting podcast expenses, keeps it ad-free, available for everyone, allows for more episodes, and helps support independent folks. We'll be back soon with another episode. Have a good one.